Today, I want to tell you the story of the time that I played against the world champion of Magic the Gathering. I've enjoyed telling the story to my friends, and I think it's pretty fun. So this took place back in 2017. The latest set to come out at the time was Amonkhet, so this card didn't even exist yet. And back then, there was a type of event that you could go to called a Grand Prix. If you've been playing Magic for a while, you're probably quite familiar with what a Grand Prix is, but if you're new to the game, it's basically like what we have today as a regional championship. But with some key differences though. So with the regional championships nowadays, those are invite-only events. So that means in order to play in the event, you need to do well at a regional championship qualifier, and then you get to play in the regional championship. But with Grand Prix, they were open to just anyone. You could just show up and play. And they were happening all over the world all the time. And for, I want to say, most players, this was the way to get onto the Pro Tour. If you did well at a Grand Prix, if you top 8'd, you would get an invite to the Pro Tour. So what a lot of people would do would be to just travel around the world and play in Grand Prix all the time. And a lot of professional players would go around playing in these Grand Prix as well. And because a lot of professional players would go to these events, it was really cool to be able to just go and play in the events as just a regular person and kind of see which pros showed up to that event. I remember going to these events with my friends, and we would check out to see who we could recognize, and it was kind of like seeing a celebrity, really. But what was even cooler was that you could get paired up against professional players and play against them. You can still do that in regional championships today, but it's just there are more hurdles to go through to get to that point, and they happen a lot less frequently, so it's not really the same thing. But some friends and I would like to go to Grand Prix sometimes, usually ones in either Toronto or Montreal or Quebec City, ones that we could drive to in maybe a day or so. And the particular one that this story is about is Grand Prix Montreal 2017. So the format for this Grand Prix was Standard. Standard was quite popular at the time, and as I said, Amonkhet was the most recent set. So in Standard, we had Battle for Zendikar, Oath of the Gatewatch, Shadows over Innistrad, Eldritch Moon, Kaladesh, Aether Revolt, and Amonkhet. So I went to play in the main event at this Grand Prix, and this is the deck that I played. Now usually I'm a fan of playing mono red aggro whenever it's a viable deck. In this particular Standard format, it wasn't really a tier 1 deck, so then failing being able to go with mono red, what I usually like to do is play a deck that's not just the best deck. I don't like to just pick the number 1 deck in the format and play that. And I also like to personalize it a bit by making some changes. I usually like to throw in some nice one-ofs in there and make it not exactly a brew, but make it personal at least. So that's what I did with this deck. And you can see it right here. This is the deck that I played. This isn't the full 60 cards. You can see it's missing lands and a couple of other cards, but this is the deck. This is black-red zombies, and I didn't come up with the idea for this deck. Somebody else did, and I thought it looked really cool, so I put it together and made a couple changes to make it kind of my own deck, but this wasn't really a tier 1 deck at the time. But I had been doing quite well with it, playing on Magic Online and playing at my LGS, and I thought it was good enough to take to the tournament. And something that's really cool is I actually still have a deck registration sheet that I had filled out for that weekend. I'm not sure why I still have this. I think maybe what happened was I filled out the deck registration before I went to the event, and then maybe forgot that I had one in my bag and just filled out another one when I was there. You can see I didn't fill in the sideboard because I probably hadn't yet decided what I wanted to put in my sideboard, but this is the actual deck list from that event that I was going to use, so that's kind of cool. So basically how this deck worked was a little bit similar to the modern Dredge deck that used to be popular, pops up sometimes, but isn't really much of a thing at the moment. But you would want to put Prized Amalgam into your graveyard and then bring it back into play by bringing creatures back from your graveyard. Because what Prized Amalgam does is it's just a 3/3 for 3. It costs a blue and a black, but the mana cost here doesn't matter because you're never paying that. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, return Prized Amalgam from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. So the main ways in the deck to be able to get back your prized amalgam were Haunted Dead and Scrap Heap Scrounger, and then with the new set Almond Cat at the time, I also added in a couple copies of Dread Wanderer. The best way to get this back was by using Haunted Dead. This one, it's a 2/2 for 4. It says when Haunted Dead enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1 spirit creature token with flying, but you can pay 1 into black and discard 2 cards. Return this from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So that's a pretty hefty cost to pay to be able to bring this back from the graveyard, but what you could do is discard something like Prized Amalgam, say Haunted Dead's in your graveyard, you pay 2 mana, discard 2 Prized Amalgams, these go to your graveyard, then Haunted Dead's going to come back, and since that came back from your graveyard, that's going to trigger your Prized Amalgams, which are going to come back also at the end of the turn. And it turned out that was a really strong thing to be able to do. And the best way to get, say, a Haunted Dead or something in your graveyard was with Insolent Neonate here. So Insolent Neonate, just a 1 red, 1/1 vampire, it has menace, it says discard a card, sacrifice this, draw a card. So the ideal start for the deck would be you would go turn 1, Insolent Neonate. Turn 2, you have 2 lands in play. You sacrifice your Insolent Neonate, you discard a Haunted Dead. Now Haunted Dead is in your graveyard, you pass the turn. On your opponent's turn, you activate Haunted Dead, discard 2 Prized Amalgams, and now on your turn 3, you have these 3 cards, plus the spirit that comes with Haunted Dead, and these can be attacking for 9 damage right there. And then, if your opponent tries to remove your creatures, well, these can just keep on coming back from the graveyard because you have lots of things that can keep on triggering them. And there were a couple of other ways to discard cards and kind of cycle through things. Cathartic Reunion here was very good. Lightning Axe, this card is still good, still sees play today. Fire Temper is basically best friends with Lightning Axe. These Fire Tempers actually, these are the ones that I had in the deck, these promo ones. I remember it kind of bothered me that I had 3 of the promo ones, but I was missing the 4th, so I didn't have a playset of promo ones, I just had the 3. But it turned out that I only wanted 3 copies of the card in the deck anyway though, so I still only have these 3 promo ones, but it worked out well that way. And then there was this card here, Unlicensed Disintegration. This card was incredible and standard back in the day. It was basically like a Terminate plus a Lightning Bolt in 1. Destroy a creature. If you control an artifact, this also does 3 damage to that creature's controller. This deck does play artifacts. You saw Scrap Heap Scrounger there, but also one of my favorite cards to play back in the day, Key to the City. This was kind of another personal touch on the deck. Not all of the decks would play Key to the City, but I thought this card was so good. It's very dirtily, but it can be really powerful. So it just costs 2 mana, you can tap it and discard a card. Up to 1 creature can't be blocked this turn. Whenever it becomes untapped, you can pay 2 if you do discard a card. So this was a discard outlet. There's a way to get your Haunted Dead or anything into the graveyard, maybe sometimes even just discard a Prized Amalgam, and then you can get card advantage too by paying 2 when it untaps. But just being able to make something unblockable was really big, and I was able to win a lot of games that way by just using Key to the City to get through things, creatures, unblockable. I also had this one of Liliana the Last Hope. Obviously not this specific one because this one's from Double Masters 2022, but there was one copy of Liliana in there just as like a good card. Liliana was really good back in Standard. Even to this day, this is one of the most fun decks that I've ever played. I really enjoyed playing this deck, and I've tried remaking it in, say, Pioneer or Modern, things like that. There are similar decks that you could play, like Dredge is pretty similar. There was the Hollow One deck in Pioneer for a while that was similar to that as well, but it's not exactly the same, and I don't think this deck is really viable in Magic today, at least on a Tier 1, Tier 2 competitive level, but it was really fun to play. So I brought this to the tournament to play. I had no buys. One thing that you could do back in the day with Grand Prix was there was a point system, and if you were able to accumulate enough points, either through, say, Pro Points or Planeswalker Points even, you could get buys to Grand Prix, and a buy means a free win, essentially. So if you had enough points, you could get, I believe, 2 or maybe even 3 buys for the first few rounds of the tournament. So you got free wins, you didn't have to play the first few rounds. I had no buys, so I just had to play all of the rounds and hope to win. So the first round, I played it and won. The second round, I played it and won. The third round, I played it and won. So at that point, I'd basically gotten my buys. Like it was the same as if I had entered the tournament with 3 buys, but I just had to do it the hard way. So then I went into the 4th round and I lost. It sucked because it kind of put a damper on, the high of starting out 3-0, because going to a Grand Prix and starting out 3-0 with no buys was a really good start. But that's okay, 3-1 was still a great start, so continue playing. Round 5, I won. So at that point, I was 4-1 going into the 6th round. And this is before the companion app and before, phones and internet and everything was widely used for integrating within Grand Prix systems and tournaments in general and that kind of thing. So to see who you were matched up against, usually people would just line up and look at the piece of paper that judges would stick on the wall with the pairings. So in order to, avoid the rush, the big group of people going there to all see who they're playing against, I would usually hang around the area where the pairing paper would be taped up so that I could see it as soon as it went up. So the pairings for round 6 go up. I search for my name to see who I'm up against. I see my name, look to the one next to it, and whose name do I see? Well, it turned out I'd been paired up against the 2015 World Champion of Magic himself, Seth Manfield. So my first thought was, holy crap, I'm playing Seth Manfield. And then I imagine likely my second thought was probably, I'm likely going to lose this match. But I didn't really have much time to think about it because, there isn't a whole lot of time between rounds. You need to get to your seat and be ready to play. Otherwise, you'll risk getting a game loss. So I made it to the seat, which wasn't really hard to find because being 4-1 going into the 6th round is quite a good record. So it's at one of the higher tables. And I know exactly who I'm looking for because I've seen Seth play many times, on Pro Tours and World Championship and stuff. So it is kind of the thing like you're looking to find a celebrity. So I found him and sat down, and I didn't really know how to interact with him because I didn't know him. Like I said, it was basically like meeting a celebrity, and I didn't want to be weird or anything. So we actually didn't really say much. We just said hi to each other, sat down, and started shuffling up our decks. I kind of just wanted to make sure I was doing everything right because, I had the world champ sitting across from me. I didn't want to embarrass myself, right? And actually, I remember being a little bit disappointed about one thing, which was that we didn't get put in a feature match. I've never been in a feature match at any large tournament. It's something that I think a lot of people want to do because it's cool when there's live coverage, right? It's like being in a sporting event, basically. Like you have commentators talking about your plays and everything, and you get showcased. And I kind of felt like having a great start to the Grand Prix like that, and then getting matched up against the world champion. Surely we would have been put in the feature match, but we weren't. But regardless, it was time to play, so that's what we did. Now, there's something quite important about this standard format to talk about, and that is the best deck you could be playing at the time, which was an absolutely broken deck. I mentioned that Kaladesh and Aether Revolt were in this format. This was before any bans had taken place, so what pretty much all of the best people were playing was Energy. Specifically, the Teamer Energy deck featuring this card right here, Aetherworks Marvel. This is a card that, when it first came out, people kind of brushed it off to the side, didn't think too much about it, but it turned out it was absolutely busted. This card got banned from Standard, but this tournament happened before it was banned. So, Aetherworks Marvel costs 4 mana, legendary artifact. Whenever a permanent you control is put into a graveyard, you get an energy. You can tap it and pay 6 energy. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can cast a card from among them without paying its mana cost, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So the way this deck worked was, you would start off by playing turn 1, Attune with Aether, another card which got banned in Standard. It's just a green, you search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it into your hand, you get 2 energy. So on turn 1, you have 2 energy. Next turn, you would play Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, 2 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life and get 3 energy. So you have 5 energy at that point. You can also pay 3 and sacrifice it to gain 3 life and get 3 energy. Next turn, you could just sacrifice this, or you could play something like a Rogue Refiner, or maybe a Whirler Virtuoso. Either one of these would get you past the 6 energy that you need to activate Aetherworks Marvel. So by turn 3, you have 6+ energy. On turn 4, when you untap, you just play your Aetherworks Marvel, you tap it, you pay your 6 energy, look at the top 6 cards of your library, and then you put this card into play. You just cast an Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger for free, basically, on turn 4. Ulamog, by the way, it's a 10 mana 10/10. It says when you cast it, you exile 2 permanents, and you do cast it from Aetherworks Marvel. It has Indestructible, and when it attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of the library. So this is a 3-turn clock. And this was by far the best deck that you could be playing, and this is what Seth was playing. So not only was I up against the world champion, he was also playing by far the best deck, which had cards in it that would be banned later on, and I was playing a deck which wasn't even tier 1. So, I go into this match thinking I'm probably going to lose, and then when we actually start and I see which deck he's playing, it just becomes that much worse. And I say worse, but it was still really cool just to be playing against him, though. I was basically just like starstruck. So it was a very daunting task ahead of me, but I had played this matchup many times in the past, and I knew there was a path to victory. And one way that I had personalized this deck was to add in more burn spells to give it more of an aggro slant. Because one way you can play this deck is to try and grind out your opponent by whittling down resources and keep on recurring prized amalgam. But I tend to like to have my decks a bit more aggressive, and that's what I did with this. I like to be able to get in damage early on and then finish out the game with burn spells. So that was my plan in this matchup. What I wanted to do was start out with an Insolent Neonate on turn 1, turn 2, discard this, put Haunted Dead in the graveyard, bring back Haunted Dead, put 2 prized amalgams into play, and just be as aggressive as possible. Failing that, I could start out with, say, a Dread Wanderer into a Scrap Heap Scrounger. That's a 2-1 on turn 1, a 3-2 on turn 2. That's an aggressive start. And that way, if I can get enough damage early on say, turns 2, 3, and maybe even 4, even if my opponent were able to put in an Ulamog into play, I could theoretically just ignore that and finish out the game with burn spells. But also what could have happened was something that usually didn't, but with Aetherworks Marvel, sometimes when you look at the top 6 cards of your library, you just don't really find anything that good to put into play. Sometimes it's just like another Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot or something, which actually isn't even that bad because it gives you enough energy to just spin the wheel again next turn, but it's not basically an immediate win. So sometimes the players could just get unlucky and not find the Ulamog, and that's what happened in at least one of the games versus Seth. Was he activated Marvel, didn't find the Ulamog, and then I was able to put on enough aggression and finish out game 1 before he was able to get an Ulamog in play. So then I'm thinking to myself, holy crap, I just took a game from the world champion. I mean, surely he's going to beat me in the next 2, but I mean, 1 game, I'm happy with that. I took a game from him, I'll always have that. So we sideboard and shuffle up to go to game 2. You saw on my deck list, I didn't fill out this sideboard in the one that I have left over, so I don't remember what was in my sideboard, but the plan remained the same. Be as aggressive as possible, try and get in some early damage. That way, even if he lands an Ulamog, I still have the out of finishing off the game with burn spells. So we go into game 2, but he's on the play this time, which is really bad for me because he can get an Ulamog out just 1 turn sooner. It's going to be that much harder for me to be able to finish off the game before he gets that in play. But I'm still just trying to put the pressure on, get things out, and attack. So that's what I did, but this deck isn't an absolute fast aggro deck, so it was inevitable that he was going to get at least 1 activation with Aetherworks Marvel before I would be able to close the game out. But by the time his turn 4 came around and he activated the Aetherworks Marvel, I had a significant board in play and quite a bit of pressure going on, and I imagine his life total was also dwindling. But he had the Marvel out and enough energy to activate it, so he activated it. And I was basically just just waiting for it to happen. Just show me the Ulamog. You know, you'll exile my stuff. There's not much I can do. We'll go to game 3. You know, probably the game is over, but it was a cool experience, and I'm going to enjoy telling my friends about it regardless. So he activates this, looks at the top 6 cards of his library, probably shuffles them around a bit, puts them down, thinks, you know, looks at them again, has an even deeper think, and then he looks at me and extends his hand. He didn't find the Ulamog, and I won. I had just won the match 2-0 versus the world champion. I couldn't believe it, but he was scooping up his cards and shuffling it back together, so the game was over and I had won. You know, we exchanged some brief polite words, he signed the match slip, and that was it. So I got up from the table to go hand in my match slip and was still just in disbelief. And I remember just taking stock of the situation while I was walking around the event hall there, thinking I had no buys coming into this event, and I'm now 5-1, and I just beat Seth Manfield 2 games to none. And after kind of realizing that, it felt like being on top of the world, and I made a mental note to myself. I remember thinking the words, "Remember how you feel right now. Remember this feeling." Because no matter how the rest of the event turns out, maybe I'll lose every game on from this point, but I still feel this way right now, and I made a note to myself, just remember this. And to this day, I still do think back to that moment and try to remember that feeling. To make this video even, I searched through my old messages in Messenger and found this message that I sent to a friend telling him that I had just started out the tournament like this and beat Seth Manfield. And it's important to remember that I had never been on the Pro Tour or anything like that. I'd never really had a particularly great result. You know, I day 2'd a Grand Prix once before, but that was pretty much it. And even still, I've never played on the Pro Tour. This is still one of the coolest experiences that I have ever had playing Magic. You know, I get to tell people that I beat the world champion, and it's also important to remember that that does not make me better than him. I do not think that. He is a better player than I am. I just happen to have a better game that day. You know, that's one of the cool things with Magic, is that you can just win a game. You know, even if you're not the most amazing player, as long as you know how to play the game, you can still beat very good people. So he was obviously by far the much better player, still is, and I'm sure always will be, but that day I happened to take the game. So after that match, we go into round 7. I'm on this huge high. You know, I have 5 wins, 1 loss, and in round 7, I won that one too. But then after round 7 is when my roll started to come to a stop. There were 2 rounds left in the day, and you needed to have a record of 6-3 or better in order to progress to day 2. I came into round 8 with a record of 6-1, and in round 8, I lost. And then in round 9, I lost. So I ended the day with a record of 6-3. So yes, I did make it to day 2, but going into day 2 with, you know, the worst record you can have basically means you're probably out of contention for making top 8. But still, making day 2 is a big accomplishment, and it did still feel pretty awesome. So on day 2, I went to play again, and by the end of the tournament, I finished with a record of 10 wins and 5 losses. It's a good record, but in this case, it wasn't enough to win anything. Only the top 64 players got prizing, and 10-5 wasn't good enough to get top 64 that time. So it was disappointing to start out so well, but then at the end of the day, not even make prizing, but that's how it goes for a lot of events for a lot of people. But still, it was an awesome event, and I got to have this cool experience and have this cool story to tell you. So that was a cool weekend. I like to think about it sometimes. You know, I enjoy telling the story to my friends. It seems like they enjoy hearing it, and I thought you might enjoy hearing it as well. I'm sure many of you might have similar stories and really cool experiences that you've had playing Magic in the past, whether it's competitive or not, you know, especially back in the day when people used to do the grinding Grand Prix thing. I think stories like this probably happen quite frequently, and I imagine it feels cool for other people like it did for me. So if you have any stories you'd like to share, leave them in the comments below. I definitely like to read them. I'm sure it'd be really cool to see what other kind of experiences like this other people have had. But anyway though, if you're still watching, thanks for watching. It'd be cool if you can like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. I'd encourage everyone to come join my Discord server. You can find a link to that in the video description below. In the video description, you can also find my affiliate link for TCG Player in case you want to purchase any Magic cards. You can follow that affiliate link first and help out the channel while you're doing so. And also, if you're a fan of this very cool Snug Ramen playmat, this is available for purchase in the Snug and Dave store, which you can find linked in the video description below as well, and it does ship worldwide. Also, I'd just like to take a moment to thank all the patrons that support me on Patreon. But otherwise though, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.